The night was quiet on the edge of the human colony. David sat inside his small outpost, a lonely station built to guard supplies for travelers. The stars outside shone like tiny lamps, and the silence of space felt heavy. He had grown used to the stillness, but tonight something was different. A sound broke the calm. It was faint, like a whisper of metal against metal. David frowned and stood up, his heart beating faster. He reached for the small blaster on his desk and listened again. The sound came from the storage bay where food and medical crates were kept. No one was supposed to be there at this hour. Step by step, David moved down the narrow corridor. The lights flickered slightly, making the shadows stretch long. He felt the air grow colder, or maybe it was just his nerves. In this far corner of space, dangers often came without warning: pirates, smugglers, or worse, aliens with unknown motives. At the door to the storage bay, he paused. The sound was louder now, shuffling, scraping, like someone digging through boxes. David pressed the control panel and the door slid open with a low hiss. He raised his blaster and aimed, ready for anything. What he saw made him freeze in the dim light. A figure bent over a crate, pulling out food packs. Not human, not one of the workers he knew. The shape was thinner, smaller, with limbs slightly too long. The skin shimmered with a faint silver tone, and eyes glowed faintly blue in the dark. An alien. She looked up, startled. Clutching the supplies to her chest for a moment, time stopped. The silence between them was heavy, broken only by the hum of the outpost machines. David's finger hovered over the trigger. One pull and the problem would end, but something in her trembling body made him hesitate. The alien didn't attack. Instead, she stepped back, her hands shaking as she held the food tighter. Her breathing was fast, uneven, almost desperate. Through the translator device on her neck, broken words came out. "Please, not hurt? I need..." David narrowed his eyes, suspicion sharp in his mind. Many stories had been told about alien thieves. Traps, tricks, ambushes. He kept his blaster steady, but his chest tightened with questions. Why was she stealing food instead of weapons? Why did she look more frightened than dangerous? "Drop it," David ordered, his voice cold. The alien's head lowered, but she didn't let go. Her eyes, those glowing blue eyes, looked at him not with anger, but with fear. Her lips trembled as if she wanted to explain, but the words were hard to form. Not for me," she whispered, her voice breaking. David's mind raced. Could this be true? Or was it a clever lie to lower his guard? Every training manual told him, do not trust, do not hesitate. But something about the way she stood there, shaking, almost begging, felt real. Still, he had to be careful. The two stared at each other, the silence stretching longer and longer. David's finger pressed lightly against the blaster trigger. The alien clutched the supplies tighter, her chest rising and falling rapidly. Finally, David took a slow step closer, his voice firm. "Tell me why," he demanded. "Why are you here? Why steal from humans?" The alien's lips parted, but only a broken sound came. Her eyes filled with something David did not expect. Sorrow. She shook her head as if words were too heavy. Then with effort, she whispered again, "Not for me. Please, don't need help." The words echoed in David's mind. They carried a weight he could not ignore. She was not fighting back, not attacking. Instead, she was pleading, like a cornered soul with nowhere left to go. David felt his grip loosen slightly on the blaster. Though he did not lower it, his training told him to act fast. But his human heart told him to wait. What if she was truly desperate? What if behind those trembling hands there was a story he did not yet know? Outside, the stars burned silently. Inside the outpost, two strangers from different worlds stood frozen, one guarding his duty, the other holding stolen hope. The night of the encounter had begun, and neither of them knew how deeply it would change their lives. David stood with his blaster raised, his eyes locked on the alien figure in front of him. The storage bay was cold and silent, yet the weight of that moment pressed down like a heavy storm. The alien clutched the food supplies against her chest as if they were treasure, her trembling body telling more than her broken words ever could. Her glowing blue eyes flickered with fear, but also with something deeper, something David had not expected. It was not greed, it was not cruelty, it was something fragile, desperation. She stepped back until her thin frame pressed against the wall, her breathing uneven, her chest rising and falling quickly. Through the cracked translator around her neck, her voice came again, sharp with panic yet heavy with sorrow. "Not for me. Please, not for me." David tightened his grip on the blaster. He had heard lies before, tricks used by raiders or smugglers to lower a guard's weapon. He had been warned again and again. Never trust an intruder, never trust an alien, but still. Her words clung to his mind like a whisper that refused to leave. He took a cautious step forward, his boots echoing on the steel floor. Who then? He asked firmly. Who were you stealing for? The alien shook her head, her silver-toned skin catching the dim light of the bay. Her lips moved, struggling with words she had not spoken often in human tongue. For little one, she whispered finally, her voice cracking. Child, brother, he's sick. He hungry? David froze. The image struck him harder than any weapon. A child, alone, starving, hidden somewhere near this outpost. Was it possible, or was this just another carefully crafted lie? Her shaking hands pulled the food tighter, her shoulders curling as if expecting him to shoot. She did not advance, she did not threaten. Instead, she looked like someone who had already lost too much and was ready to lose more. Please, she said again, the word heavy with meaning. Her knees bent slightly, as if the strength was leaving her. The desperation in her tone was undeniable. It was raw, unpolished, real. David felt the walls inside his heart shift, but suspicion still held him. What proof do you have? He demanded, his voice sharp. Where is this child? How do I know this is not a trap? The alien's glowing eyes filled with water, a shimmer of tears that clung at the edges. She tried to speak, but only a broken sound came out first. Then slowly, with effort, she raised her free hand and placed it over her chest. No trap, she whispered, her voice trembling. Swear. On life, only truth. For the first time, David saw not a thief, not an enemy, but a sister. A sister who carried the weight of another life on her shoulders. The sight dug into him, making him remember the stories of old Earth. Stories of war, hunger, and how far humans once went to save their own. Still, duty chained him if he helped her. He risked his own people turning against him. If he let her go, she might lead others here, more aliens, maybe an ambush. The balance between heart and rule tore at him. The alien must have seen the conflict on his face because she spoke again, her words fragile but strong enough to cut through the silence. I steal, because no choice, she said slowly. Brother dying. No food, no medicine. Only me, her body shook as she spoke. Her knees finally giving in, she sank to the floor, clutching the supplies so tightly her knuckles turned pale. Her eyes lifted to him, glowing with sorrow and a strange kind of trust. It was as if she was laying her life in his hands, accepting whatever he decided. David stood frozen, his blaster still pointed. But his resolve weakening, he wanted to believe her. Yet doubt pressed like iron chains on his chest. The silence grew louder, the hum of the machines a drumbeat to his racing thoughts. Then, as if breaking under the weight, she whispered a final plea. Kill me, if must, but let food go, please. For him. The words hit David like a hammer, not for herself, but for another. Not to live longer, but to give another a chance. That was not the language of liars, that was the voice of sacrifice. David lowered his blaster slightly. His hand trembling, he could not fully trust her yet, but he could not ignore the raw truth shining in her voice and eyes. This was no simple theft. This was a struggle between survival and law, between heart and duty in that cold storage bay. The air felt heavier than ever. A human soldier and an alien thief stood across from each other, one protecting supplies, the other protecting life. The moment stretched endlessly, holding both fear and fragile hope. David did not know what he would decide yet, but he knew one thing. This encounter was no longer about stolen food. It was about a secret pain he had not yet seen, a pain that would soon pull him into a story he could not walk away from. The alien thief lowered her head, clutching the food as if it were her brother's heartbeat itself. David's finger slipped slightly off the trigger, though his mind was still at war. The battle between suspicion and compassion had just begun, and it was a battle that would decide not only her fate, but his own humanity. The storage bay was still and heavy. David stood with his blaster lowered but not gone, his eyes locked on the alien before him. Her thin frame trembled as she held the stolen supplies close, her silver-toned skin reflecting the dim light like faded metal. Her glowing blue eyes carried a pain he could not ignore, though his training warned him not to trust. Talk, David said finally, his voice sharp but softer than before. Tell me the truth now. The alien's lips parted, but for a moment no sound came. Her chest rose and fell quickly, as if every breath was a struggle. Then with a shiver, She spoke through her broken translator. My name is Kayla, she whispered, her words broken. I not thief by choice. I only sister. David frowned, his finger brushing the side of his blaster. Her voice carried no anger, only weight, a kind of sorrow that seemed too heavy for someone so young. Kayla's eyes filled with water, shimmering tears that clung but did not fall. She pressed her hand to her chest and took another shaking breath. My people once had ship, she said slowly. We travel. We search for home. But ship crashed near here. Her voice cracked and she looked down. The shame heavy in her posture, David listened, though every part of him wanted to question, to doubt. Yet something about her trembling hands, the way she spoke with pauses of pain, made it hard to turn away. She clutched the supplies tighter, as if afraid he might rip them from her arms. In crash. Many die, she continued, her translator making her words jagged. Only me and brother left. Her throat tightened, but she forced herself to go on. He's small. He's sick. He need medicine, food. But I have nothing. David's heart tightened inside his chest. He imagined a small alien child, weak and struggling for breath, hidden somewhere in the shadows of the planet. Was this truly what drove her to steal? He studied her eyes, searching for a trick, but all he saw was sorrow and desperation. Kayla's hands shook as she held the food, her voice dropping lower. I thought humans cruel, she admitted. They chase us, they fear us, they call us thieves, monsters. She looked up at him now, her glowing eyes bright with pain. I afraid to ask, so I steal. Because if I not, he die. The words pierced David deeper than he wanted to admit. Her confession was not filled with excuses, only raw honesty. A sister carrying the burden of a dying brother, risking everything for him. It was not the story of an enemy. It was the story of someone holding on by a thread. For a long moment, David said nothing. The silence stretched between them, broken only by the hum of the outpost machines. His mind fought itself, duty against heart, orders against compassion. Every lesson told him not to believe her. But his soul whispered something else. Kayla dropped to her knees, no longer able to stand tall. The supplies slipped slightly from her arms, and she clutched them like a lifeline. Her voice cracked, and finally the tears fell. I beg, she whispered, her words trembling. Not for me. Kill me if must. But let me take this. For him, David's chest felt tight. He remembered his own sister back on Earth years ago. He remembered her sick days, the times his family had to fight to get medicine. He remembered the fear in his mother's eyes, the same fear he now saw in Kayla's. It was a memory he had buried. But Kayla's words had unearthed it like a wound. His hand on the blaster trembled, and slowly he lowered it further still. His voice came sharp. If what you say is true, show me. Kayla lifted her head, her tears catching the dim light. Her lips parted in shock, unsure if he meant it. Show me your brother, David repeated firmly. If you want me to believe, I need proof. For a moment, Kayla hesitated, fear twisting her expression. But then with a small nod she whispered, Yes, I swear. Her hands clutched the supplies close as she looked at him with pleading eyes. Please, do not shoot. I take you. You see, David studied her, the weight of her words pulling at him. Could he risk following her? Could he trust even a little? The rules said no, but the heart inside him whispered yes. Something about her trembling body, her desperate honesty, made him believe she was not lying. Still, caution burned in his mind. If she led him into a trap, he might never leave alive if she told the truth. Then he was about to see something that would change everything. He took a slow step forward, lowering his weapon but not putting it away. Fine, he said at last, his voice low. You'll take me to him. And if this is a trick, it will end badly for you. Kayla bowed her head, her tears dripping onto the cold steel floor. No trick, she whispered. No more lies. Only truth. The silence wrapped around them once more. The storage bay, once a place of simple supplies, had become a place where trust and doubt collided. David had not expected his night to unfold this way. He had not expected to look into the eyes of an enemy and see not hatred but sorrow. As Kayla slowly stood, clutching the food to her chest, David realized something. Her sad confession had melted part of his suspicion. It had broken through his armor of rules and training, and though he still carried doubt, he knew one thing. The story was no longer about a thief. It was about a desperate sister, and the choice he would soon have to make. The night outside the outpost was colder than usual. Stars burned silently far above. But inside the storage bay, a storm raged quietly between two souls. David stood with his blaster lowered, but not forgotten, his eyes sharp on Kayla, the alien thief who was no longer just a thief in his mind. Her confession still echoed in his ears, her brother, her crash, her desperate fight for survival. Yet doubt sat on his shoulders like a heavy weight, whispering caution. Kayla wiped at her glowing eyes with the back of her hand, her fingers trembling. She clutched the food packs to her chest as though letting go meant letting her brother die. Her thin frame shook, not with anger but with fear and exhaustion. Her voice, through the damaged translator, came soft, fragile. "You not believe me," she said, her words slow and broken. "You think I lie?" David did not answer at first. He was torn between two worlds, his training and his heart. Everything he had learned told him never to trust intruders, never to let emotions cloud judgment. But the girl in front of him did not fit the picture of an enemy. She looked like someone who had been fighting a war against hunger and loss long before stepping into his outpost. "I don't know what to believe," David finally said, his tone sharp but unsteady. "If I trust you and this is a trap, I could lose everything." Kayla's eyes widened, shining with hurt. "I have nothing," she whispered, her words breaking. "No army, no ship, no weapons, and only him, only my brother." Her voice cracked and her knees bent slightly as though her body could no longer carry the weight of her truth. She lowered her head as if surrendering, and whispered again, "If you want, kill me, kill, but food go with him." David felt something twist inside his chest. He remembered her words from before, how she had begged not for her own life but for the life of another. He remembered her confession, her sorrow and the tears that had spilled on the steel floor. It was not the voice of a liar. It was the voice of someone drowning, someone who had chosen to suffer so another might live. Still his suspicion clawed at him. What if others wait outside? He asked, his voice cutting, "What if you lead me to ambush?" Kayla's head snapped up quickly, her eyes filled with both pain and anger now. "No ambush," she cried, her translator struggling to catch the force of her words. "No more left. Only him. Only me." The silence that followed was thick. David could hear his own breath, feel the beat of his own heart echoing in his ears. Could he trust her? Could he risk following her into the shadows outside the outpost? One wrong step could mean death, yet one act of mercy could mean saving a life. Kayla must have sensed his hesitation, because she slowly took a step closer, her arm still clutching the food. She stopped short, not daring to move too far, and whispered, "Come with me. I show you. You see truth." Her eyes glowed in the dim light, filled with something that looked like hope and fear bound together. David tightened his grip on the blaster, though he had already lowered it. Every instinct screamed to refuse, to lock her up, to report her, but his heart, the very core of his humanity, whispered something different. It whispered that compassion was not weakness, that sometimes rules had to bend when lives were at stake. He stepped closer, his shadow stretching long across the floor. "If I follow you," he said coldly, "and if this is a trick, it will be the last trick you ever play." Kayla nodded quickly, no hesitation in her glowing eyes. "No trick," she promised, her voice shaking but strong. "No lies. Only truth." The clash of trust burned between them like fire and ice. David knew he was not ready to believe completely, but he also knew he was not ready to condemn her either. Her desperation had carved a crack in his armor of suspicion, a crack that only grew wider with every tear and every word. He thought of his outpost, the lonely nights, the silence of the stars. He thought of how easy it would be to turn her away, to wash his hands of the problem. But then he thought of the child, the small brother waiting in some dark corner of the planet, gasping for breath, hoping for food. If Kayla spoke the truth, walking away now would mean letting a child die. And David, no matter how hard he tried, could not carry that weight. He finally let out a breath, heavy and tired. "Fine," he said, his voice low. "You'll take me to him. I'll see this brother of yours myself." Kayla's eyes widened with relief, tears sliding again down her cheeks. She nodded quickly, clutching the food tighter. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Thank you." "Human?" David turned off the safety on his blaster and motioned toward the door. "I'm not thanking you yet," he said coldly. "If this is a trap, you won't live long enough to regret it." Kayla lowered her head, her voice soft as a whisper of wind. No trap, only truth. Together they stepped out of the storage bay. The cold night air of the colony touched their skin, carrying with it the sound of distant winds. Two figures, one human and one alien, walking into the unknown. One carrying suspicion, the other carrying hope. The clash of trust had begun, and whatever waited ahead would decide if their fragile bond survived or shattered forever. The night outside was colder than David expected. The winds swept across the barren land. Carrying dust and silence, Kayla walked ahead, clutching the food to her chest. Her steps quick but unsteady, David followed close, his blaster ready, every nerve on edge. The colony lights faded behind them, leaving only stars above. It felt like walking into a different world, dark, empty, and dangerous. David's boots crunched softly against the ground, every sound echoing louder in the night. His mind raced with questions, each one more dangerous than the last. What if this was a trap? What if others waited in the shadows? And yet, what if she truly spoke the truth? The doubt gnawed at him, but the memory of her tears and broken words kept pushing him forward. Kayla glanced back more than once, her glowing eyes dim in the starlight. Each time David caught a flicker of fear in them, not of him, but of what might happen if they were caught. She moved quickly, but not with the grace of a soldier. Her movements were clumsy, desperate, like someone who had lived too long in hunger and fear. Finally, they reached a line of jagged rocks near a cliffside. Kayla slowed, looking around carefully before slipping through a narrow opening between the stones. David hesitated, his hand tightening on the blaster. The shadows inside the rocks looked like the open jaws of a beast, waiting to swallow him whole. Here, Kayla whispered through her translator, her voice trembling. Inside. Safe. David narrowed his eyes but followed. Stepping into the darkness, the air grew cooler, the sound of the wind fading behind them. It smelled of dust, metal, and faint smoke. As his eyes adjusted, he saw it. A broken shuttle, half buried under stone and dirt. The hull was cracked, the metal scarred from fire and impact. This was no shelter by choice, it was wreckage, the grave of a dream. Kayla slipped through a torn section of the shuttle and motioned for him to follow. Inside was dim, lit only by a small lantern crafted from scraps. The air was stale but warm. David's eyes scanned the space, ready for an ambush. But what he saw instead froze him in place. In the corner, lying on a pile of old blankets, was a child, small, thin, his skin the same silver tone as Kayla's but paler. Almost gray, his chest rose and fell weakly, each breath shallow. His glowing blue eyes flickered faintly, opening only halfway as he tried to look at them. David's heart tightened. The boy was little more than a shadow of life, his body trembling under the thin blanket. Beside him lay scraps of food wrappers, old, empty, and useless. This was no trap, no trick, this was suffering made real. Kayla hurried to his side, kneeling beside the boy. She placed the food near him, her hands shaking as she touched his forehead. "Brother," she whispered softly in her own tongue. The boy stirred weakly, his lips parting as if to speak, but no sound came. Kayla's tears fell silently as she turned to David. "You see," she said, her voice breaking, "no lie, no ambush, only him." David stood frozen, his blaster heavy in his hand, though it now felt pointless. The sight before him was more powerful than any weapon. The boy was dying, and Kayla had risked everything to keep him alive. David had no words, only silence. As the truth pressed into him like a blade, he stepped closer, his boots soft against the floor of the shuttle. The boy's eyes moved to him, glowing faintly in the dim light. There was no hatred in them, no fear, only weakness and quiet hope. David's chest tightened further, his breath catching as if the boy's struggle had become his own. Kayla whispered again, her words trembling. "I try to help him, but I have nothing." She gestured at the broken shuttle, at the scraps of metal and useless wires. "I steal because I must. If I ask, humans kill us, so I take, I risk." Her voice cracked and her shoulders shook with silent sobs. All for him. David lowered his blaster at last, the weight leaving his hands. The weapon clattered softly against his side as he let it drop to his belt. He stared at Kayla and the boy, his heart burning with a conflict he could no longer ignore. This was no enemy base, no hidden trap. This was a tomb of a family, a shattered home, and a desperate sister trying to save what little remained. David thought of the colony, of how others would have treated them, arrest, punishment, maybe even death. He thought of the rules he had been sworn to follow, and for the first time those rules felt wrong. The silence stretched long inside the shuttle. David finally crouched near the boy, his voice low and steady. "What is his name?" Kayla looked up, her glowing eyes wide with shock that he would ask. "Lior," she whispered softly, her hand brushing her brother's weak hair. "His name is Lior." David looked at the child, at the fragile breath that kept him tied to life. He had never felt so human, so torn. This was no longer a simple choice of law or order. It was a choice of life, of compassion, of what it truly meant to be human outside. The stars still burned cold and distant. Inside the wrecked shuttle, however, a fragile bond began to form. A human soldier stood over a broken family, his heart caught between suspicion and mercy. And in that moment, David knew the night was no longer about guarding supplies. It was about deciding what kind of man he would be when faced with suffering he could no longer deny. The air inside the broken shuttle was heavy. David stood still, his eyes fixed on the boy lying weakly on the pile of blankets. Lior's breaths were shallow, his body so fragile that every rise of his chest seemed like a battle. Beside him, Kayla pressed her hand gently against his forehead, whispering in her own tongue. David felt his chest tighten. He had seen suffering before on distant colonies, on Earth during his early years. But this was different. This was not war or crime. This was a sister giving everything for the life of her brother. He took a step closer, crouching to see the boy's face. Lior's glowing eyes fluttered open, weak but curious. The child looked at him not with fear, but with a faint spark of trust. David's breath caught in his throat. Kayla looked up, her glowing eyes wet with tears. "You see now," she whispered, her translator catching her fragile voice. "No army, no trick, only him." Her hands shook as she clutched the food pack tighter. "I have nothing else. Only this. Only hope." David's hand rested on the blaster at his side, though his grip was loose. His mind swirled with voices, the strict orders of his duty and the quiet pull of his heart. If he followed his rules, he should report her, deliver her to the colony, let the authorities decide, but if he did, Kayla and her brother would not survive the night. He could see it in the boy's trembling breath. In Kayla's desperate eyes, the silence between them stretched, broken only by the weak cough of the child. David closed his eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of choice pressing down on him. He thought of the colony leaders, their hard voices reminding him that aliens could not be trusted. He thought of Kayla kneeling in front of him, her whole world wrapped up in the life of her brother, and he thought of what it meant to be human. Slowly, David reached out and took one of the food packs from Kayla's shaking hands. He tore it open and passed it back to her, her glowing eyes widened in shock, her lips parting as if she could not believe what she saw. "You help?" she whispered, her translator stumbling on the words. David nodded once, firm but quiet. "Yes," he said softly. "I help." Kayla's tears spilled freely now, sliding down her cheeks as she quickly fed the boy. Lior's hands trembled as he tried to hold the food, but Kayla guided him, helping him swallow slowly. The boy's glowing eyes flickered brighter for a moment, a faint shimmer of life returning. David watched, his chest heavy but warm. It was the smallest thing, but it was enough to change everything. Still, danger pressed in his mind. If the colony discovered what he had done, they would call him a traitor. If word spread that he had aided an alien, he could lose his post, his freedom, maybe even his life. But as he looked at the boy, weak yet clinging to life, he knew there was no turning back. Kayla looked up at him, her voice trembling but filled with something new. Hope. "Why?" she asked softly. "Why help me?" David met her eyes, his voice steady though his heart was heavy. "Because I am human," he said simply, "and humans are meant to protect life." Kayla's lips trembled, her tears falling faster. She bowed her head deeply, as though his words were more powerful than any weapon. Her hands clutched her brother, her whole body shaking with both relief and disbelief. David sat back on his heels, his blaster forgotten at his side. For the first time since the encounter began, he felt at peace with his decision. The rules of men were strong, but the rules of the heart were stronger. And tonight his heart had chosen mercy. The broken shuttle was quiet now. Lior ate slowly, his breathing still weak but steadier than before. Kayla whispered soft words to him in her language, soothing him with a tenderness that pierced David's chest. This was family, he thought, a bond that crossed even the boundaries of species. But deep inside he knew this was not the end. Helping them tonight meant he had stepped into something far larger than himself. If the colony found out, they would punish him. If other humans discovered Kayla and Lior, they might not show the same mercy. And yet he could not walk away, not now. Not after seeing the truth with his own eyes. He rose slowly, his figure tall in the dim light of the wreckage. "You can stay hidden here," he said quietly. "I will bring what you need, food, water, medicine." Kayla looked up at him, her glowing eyes shining with tears. Her lips moved, but the translator only managed 2 words. "Thank you." David nodded, his face stern but his heart soft. "Don't thank me yet," he said, his voice low. "This is dangerous, for you, for me. If they find out, it could end badly." Kayla's head lowered, but her voice came steady. "Even if end, you gave him chance." Her words cut deep into David's heart. A chance, that was all she asked. All she fought for, not victory, not wealth. Just a chance for her brother to breathe a little longer. And he, a human soldier, had given it to her outside. The night sky stretched endless and cold. Inside the broken shuttle, however, warmth flickered, fragile but real. A bond had been formed. Born from desperation and sealed by choice, a human's compassion had crossed the boundary of fear and law. And though danger loomed ahead, David knew one truth. Tonight he had chosen life over rules, heart over duty, humanity over fear. The night passed slowly inside the broken shuttle. David sat against the cracked wall, his blaster resting at his side but unused. Kayla stayed near her brother, feeding him carefully and whispering soft words in her language. The boy Lior was still weak, but his breathing grew steadier with each passing hour. The faint glow in his eyes flickered brighter, a fragile light that refused to die. David watched in silence, his thoughts heavy. He had made his choice, and there was no turning back. By giving them food, by lowering his weapon, he had crossed a line. If the colony found out, he would pay the price. But as he looked at the 2 siblings, he knew he would not regret it. Kayla finally turned her glowing eyes toward him. Her voice came soft through the translator. "You save him," she whispered. "You give us life." David shook his head slowly, his voice steady. "I gave you food, but you saved him with your love." Kayla's lips trembled, and tears touched her silver-toned cheeks. She looked down at her brother and brushed her hand gently across his face. "Without you, he gone," she said, her words breaking. "You human, but you give more heart than my own people once did." David's chest tightened at her words. For so long he had been trained to see aliens as dangerous, untrustworthy, a threat to humanity. But here, in the wreckage of a forgotten ship, he had found something else. Not a threat, not an enemy, but a bond. A bond born from compassion, from the simple act of helping someone in need. He leaned forward, his voice low. "Kayla, listen carefully," he said. "You must stay hidden if the patrols find you. They will not show mercy." Kayla nodded, her eyes full of fear but also trust. "We stay here," she whispered, "until safe." For a moment silence fell again. The wind outside howled faintly through the cracks of the rocks. The stars beyond the cliff burned bright, watching silently over them, and in that quiet, David felt something he had not felt in years. Peace. Not the peace of safety, but the peace of doing what was right. Lior stirred and reached out his small hand weakly. David hesitated, then slowly placed his hand in the boy's. The alien child's skin was cool, fragile, but the grip was firm. His glowing eyes blinked at David with quiet trust. David's throat tightened as he realized the weight of that gesture. This boy, who had every reason to fear humans, instead trusted him. That trust was not small, it was everything. Kayla saw it too, and her tears came again. She whispered softly, "He'd trust you more than anyone." David gave a faint smile, rare and heavy with meaning. "Then I'll make sure I don't break that trust," he said quietly. The hours passed, and finally David rose. "I must return to the outpost," he said firmly. "If I vanish too long, others will notice." Kayla's eyes filled with worry, her voice rushed. "You leave us?" David shook his head. "No. I will come back. I'll bring medicine, more food, water, blankets, everything you need." Kayla's lips parted in shock. "You would risk for us?" David's voice was steady, though his heart was heavy with the truth. "Yes, because I can't walk away, not after seeing this. Not after hearing you." He paused, his eyes fixed on hers. "Because I am human, and humanity means more than just rules, it means compassion." Kayla bowed her head deeply. Unable to speak for a moment, her tears fell silently. dripping onto her brother's blanket. Finally, she whispered, "I thought humans cruel. But you prove me wrong." David turned toward the narrow opening of the rocks. The cold air of the night swept in as he stepped outside. The stars stretched endlessly above, distant and eternal. He felt the danger of his choice pressing against him like a shadow. But he also felt something else, strength. The kind that came not from weapons but from compassion. Behind him, Kayla's voice carried softly through the broken shuttle. "Human. Friend," she whispered. The word was heavy, uncertain, but it carried more meaning than any oath. David paused, his heart tightening, then gave a faint nod. "Yes," he said to the night. "Friend?" He walked back toward the outpost, his figure small against the vast emptiness of the land, but in his chest a fire burned quietly. He knew he was no longer just a guard of supplies. He had become something else, a protector, not of boxes or crates, but of life, of trust, of a fragile bond between species. The colony would never forgive him if they found out. The laws of humans and the pride of aliens would both call it wrong. But to David, it was the most human thing he had ever done. He had chosen compassion, and in doing so, he had discovered a bond that crossed stars. Inside the broken shuttle, Kayla held her brother close, her tears falling with both relief and hope. And for the first time in many nights, Lear's weak lips curved into the faintest smile. It was fragile, fleeting, but it was life. A smile born from a bond beyond species. A smile that proved kindness was the one thing stronger than fear.